So I just want to look with you over the last couple days what we've been talking about in terms of all these bounces and these graphs and things like that. So what we've been doing is you've been starting with a polynomial. And from the polynomial, you are working on turning it into factors. You did that with star factoring or the group factoring or GCF factoring, but you go from a polynomial and you turn it into a factor. From the factor, you could get the zeros and the bounces and the multiplicity. And from the zeros, once you know that, then you can produce a graph. So that's what we've done for the last 2 days. We've gone from polynomial to factors, from factors to zeros. From the zeros and the Lie coefficient test, we've been able to produce a graph. What we're going to do now is reverse the process. Okay, so we are going to start maybe with a graph and work backwards and find the zeros, and work backwards to find the factors, and work backwards from that to come up with the polynomial. You might be dropped into that process at different places. So if you are given a graph, then you know you are truly starting at the very beginning. If you are given zeros, then you're starting one step into the process, and you can work your way from there. Just like in the white, going forward, you could start with a polynomial, or sometimes you get lucky and you start with factors, and then you're one step further in the process already. Okay, so depending on where you start, you can maybe eliminate some of the steps. So what I'm going to do with you today is I'm going to start with you at zeros. Okay, we're going to start right there, and we're going to work our way backwards and come up with the polynomial. So here's what it would look like. So let's imagine that we're right there, and I'm going to give you an example. So I'll say starting with zeros at 4, -3, and 2/5. Create a cubic polynomial. So we're dropping ourselves into the process where we know the zeros. So if we know the zeros, what would be the next step? Find the factors. Okay, so let's find the factors that go with those zeros, because zeros came from factors. So if the 0 is 4, which means it's hitting the graph at 4, where did it come from? From what factor would that have come from? X minus 4. Factor's always written as parentheses with an X. That's a factor. If the next 0 is at -3, which means my graph is crossed, it would have crossed at -3, where did it come from? What factor would have produced that? X plus 3. And then if it also crossed the x-axis at 2/5, where did what was the factor? Ooh, nice job, 5x plus 2. Now some people may not have gotten that right away. I've heard other people say, instead of 5x plus 2, I've heard them say, it'd be minus, yeah, x minus 2/5. The thing about factors is they shouldn't have fractions in them. So we don't want to leave 2/5 there as a fraction. So what we would do is we would multiply by the number 5 so that we wouldn't have fractions anymore. So I would just by this factor that needs it, multiply that by a 5 and that by a 5. So what we really end up with are the factors that are x minus 4, x plus 3, and then 5x minus 2, not plus 2, 5x minus 2. So those are the factors. So we start with the zeros.
Sorry, how did that turn into negative?
It always was a negative.
You accidentally wrote it down as positive the first time.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Oh, I did? Okay, thanks. All right, so we're working backwards. We've had the zeros. Now we've got our factors. How do we work backwards from our factors and get it into a full-fledged polynomial? Foil. And not just foil, superfoil. Okay? Not just foil, but superfoil. All right, so let's just do 2 at a time. Let's not try and tackle this whole thing at once. Let's just foil the first 2. Okay, we'll take this and we'll do foil on my first 2. All right, foil it with me. What do we get? X squared, what else? Plus 3x and minus 4x and negative 12. That's the first foil. I still have the 5x minus 2 hanging on the end. And then in that first foil, I should combine those terms. So I should end up with x squared, and then what will I end up with in the middle? Minus 1x minus 12. And 5x minus 2. So the FOIL process is done. Now I'm ready to superfoil. Okay, and to superfoil, that means we're going to take our x squared, that's our beginning term, okay, and all of those terms are going to go to 5x. The first, the middle, and the last. Okay, so all of those are going to go, and so that's going to give me 5x to the third minus 5x to the second minus 60x. The second part of superfoil is to take all those same terms and distribute them to the negative 2. So I'm going to go all the way to the negative 2. So that will give me negative 2x squared, positive 2x, and positive 24. So now I want to combine all the like terms together and come up with my final polynomial. Are there any other cubic terms? No. Are there any other squared terms? How many altogether? Negative 7. Are there any other x terms? How many altogether? Negative 58. And then the 24 that was hanging out at the end. This is called a polynomial. We were supposed to specifically make a cubic. Is this a cubic polynomial? Yes. Okay, what's the lead term? 5. What does that tell you? Positive, so it's going. What's the trailing coefficient? The trailing coefficient, trailing means at the end, is 24. What does that tell you? Crosses the y-axis at 24. So we've got positive here. That tells me that the quadrant is going up in quadrant 1. This is going to be the y-intercept of where it's crossing the graph. And then we know it's cubic. And we already know what the zeros were from the original problem. So we should be able to graph this whole thing. We're not focusing on graphs right now. You'll be glad to know none of your homework is graphing tonight, but it will be on your open quiz. All right, let's try another one. Okay, create a polynomial with lead coefficient negative 2 and zeros at 0, negative 1/2, 3, multiplicity 2. So I'm dropping you into the process and I'm giving you zeros. From the zeros, you should create factors. From the factors, you should create a polynomial. So let's go to our factors. Okay, what is our first factor?
X.
Good, plain old x. That's where the 0 comes from. So 0 comes from plain old x. What is my second factor?
2x minus 1.
2x plus
Oh, plus 1?
1. Okay, and again, if you're not sure about that, start out writing it as x plus half. And then double everything so that you can get rid of the fractions. And that turns into, right, so 2x, Oops. Plus 1. Okay, what's the third factor?
X minus 3 squared.
X minus 3
Oh, squared.
squared because it's multiplicity 2. Now for FOIL, it's really not good to write the square. For FOIL, it's much better if you write it twice, because you're going to have to write it twice to FOIL it out anyway. So it's much better to be written that way. Am I missing anything?
Oh, the -2.
Okay, there's a lead coefficient of -2. So that means in front of all of this, I should have a plain -2. Not a -2 with an extra x or anything, just a regular -2. Okay, we got to work through FOIL and superFOIL. And don't get overwhelmed at the whole thing. Just kind of chunk it a couple things at a time. What do you want to do first?
The last
X is the 2.
Okay, I would do these two first. Okay? And that's just straight out distributing. So that's what I would do first if it were me. So I'd have -2 and I'd have 2x squared plus 1x. Then I would do the x minus 3 FOIL second. That's going to give me x squared minus 3x minus 3x plus 9. Before I go to superFOIL,
Can we simplify the
I would simplify the minus, is that what you're going to say? The minus 3x's. So I'd have minus 6x plus 9. So that's what I would do first. Get it all simplified. I'm going to save the -2 distributing for the very end. Okay, save it for last. Yeah, Vincent. That's what you're asking about? Sorry. Thank you. Catch my... Okay, now we can superFOIL. So for superFOIL, I'm going to take 2x squared and I'm going to distribute that to all 3 of the pieces that come behind. So I'm going to have 2x squared to regular x squared, that's 2x to the 4th. 2x squared to -6, that's -12x cubed. And then 2x squared to the 9 at the end is 18x squared. The second half of superFOIL takes the 1x and does that to all 3 pieces. So we will have 1x cubed minus 6x squared plus 9x. Then I would clean that up, so I still have this -2 leading coefficient out front. Are there any other cubic terms besides the -12? Okay, so what's the total? -11. All right, are they, for the squared terms, what's the total? Negative or positive? Positive 12x squared, because the 18 is positive. And then any other terms I haven't covered? The 9x at the end. And the very last thing would be to finally distribute by that lead coefficient we've been holding on to the whole time. So that'll give me -4x to the 4th plus 22x to the 3rd minus 24x squared minus 18x. So, what's the leading coefficient now? Which means, okay, it's going down, and the fact that this is a quartic means it's double down. Okay, double down. Where is it going to cross the y-axis? Ooh, nice. At 0. Okay, because you still got to think after the 18 would be a 0. Okay, so that's going to cross the y-axis there. So I'm not asking you to create the graph, but be thinking, what's that graph going to ultimately look like when I have multiplicity? So if the multiplicity is higher than 2, if it's 3, then you're going to need 3 of the factors to cover in your superFOIL.
So does that mean that where it hits the y-axis is whatever number doesn't have an x factor at the end?
That's the trailing coefficient, right? Okay, where are you most likely to make mistakes?
In the foil.
In the foiling. It could be a foil, it could be an adding mistake. Okay, so this is not hard. It just means you have to be careful. So how would you check? Okay, how would you check this? I would recommend then grabbing your graphing calculator, putting this equation, this polynomial you created into your graphing calculator, and see if it indeed does what it's supposed to. Does it cross a 0 at 0? Does it cross at -1/2? Does it bounce at 3? Check it. If it doesn't, then you did something wrong in your FOIL and go back and figure out what you did wrong. There's only 6 problems for homework. Okay, but the superfoil takes a little while, and I want you to check it and make sure that the polynomial you created does what it was supposed to do from the instructions at the beginning. All right, so for this last one, I want to check that. So can you grab out your graphing calculator, please? Go to y equals, actually go to your window, set your window to standard, -10s to +10s all around. All right, turn it on. You probably have maybe a plot on from the last time. Make sure your plots are off. Okay, make sure your window is set to normal, -10 to +10. Thank you, Rose. Okay, and then type in this beastly long equation. So -4 x to the 4th plus 22x cubed minus 24x squared minus 18x. Oops, I went down. Okay, so let's fix this. Insert -4x to the 4th plus. All right. Yeah, so I just put it in y2 instead of y1. That's okay. And we'll take a look at our graph. It's supposed to bounce off of 3. Still thinking. Okay, -1/2, 0. Just make sure I typed everything in right. Negative. Oh, I'm missing a 2. So it didn't do what I thought. Didn't bounce off 3 like I thought it should have. All right, let's check that. Okay, there we go. Now it's crossing off 3. It's coming up at -1/2. It's crossing at 0, and it's bouncing off of 3, and it's an upside down, okay, upside down W shape. Okay, we can't see it all because of the window. If I changed my window, I'd be able to see it a little bit more. So I could maybe change my window to -5 to 5.
Yeah. Well, what the?
But lower this to maybe -50. Let's see if we can see it a little better. There we go, and now we can see the bounce, and it's coming back down. So we know we did everything right.